thank you for continuing to pursue this insight about being effective in sages. Let me begin today by offering you some direction. As an influencer, as a leader of this ministry, you can't simply instruct and coach and guide your people in this group. It has been said that the three best ways to learn are by example, example, example. And you can be an example of what you want the sages to do as they see you doing it. Now, we've worked a bit and talked a bit about creating ways for intergenerational communication. If the New Testament is serious about elders impacting the arriving generation, and it is because it's addressed repeatedly, then we need to do what is necessary, including making some changes, dropping some things, adding some things that will accomplish what God has wanted us to do. We talked about some problems. We talked about some solutions, and you have likely already arrived at several solutions that are better than the ones that I presented. But if you have, please pass those on to me and everybody else. The four problems that we've talked about is that sages' life experience is usually locked away in this inaccessible library of the mind and the memory. Second problem is there's no structured and consistent process to hand off knowledge from one generation to the next. Things like elders tell me your memories can change that. Third, there is the challenge of age segregation, where there is no interaction between sages and those who are younger. I've alluded to the fact that most local churches are structured in educational and ministerial silos that result in age segregation. With that segregation, the arriving generation doesn't benefit from the wisdom and insight of people who are older than them. And the sages miss out on that sense of having helped other people. So let's talk then about how we can change this dynamic. The first is this. I think we have to recognize the value of this interaction. At our first Sages Summit in St. Charles, Mark Burke, who is a pastor in the St. Louis area, the Illinois side of the river, shared with us about their small groups and how that their small groups are not based on age at all, but there will be 9-year-olds in the room with 79-year-olds, and they're participating in this thing together. And his observation after having done this for several years is that this approach has changed our church. Our people trust each other more, and there is a depth of unity that we had never had. Something to think about, that we may need to have some groups, some small groups that are not age-based, they're not interest-based, but instead there's simply this group from top to bottom, the youngest to the oldest. So number one, we need to recognize the value of this interaction. The second thing that it will take is we must realize that we're just going to have to be intentional in a sustained direction for a long period of time. We can't fix this in a month. Can't fix it in 2 months. I'm not sure we can fix it in 3 years. It's going to take a strategy that is intentional. Let me give you a couple of approaches. How about taking a midweek service or even a special event where every sage sits down with a couple of young people in their 30s, casual, coffee, popcorn, soda, water, and the young people ask these elders 5 to 7 questions, 30 to 45 minutes. End it having the younger pray for the sage, and then the sage taking the hands of the young in their own to pray for those who are younger. Even one service of that a year will develop a dimension of unity among the various age groups in the church. And when people understand what is happening at that service, it will be one of the better services the church has. A second approach is for each sage to accept personal responsibility for connecting with a younger person, or for each sage age couple to connect with a younger couple. And this works, but it isn't going to just happen. Several years ago, it was part of my responsibility and a privilege to attend the Canada Conference. That particular conference was in Halifax, Nova Scotia. And we had service one evening, and after church, several of we preachers went to a little Greek place just down the road, just past the Holiday Inn where we were all staying. And we went there for a bite and for a time of fellowship. And I enjoyed the fellowship. Guys like Ted Wagner and Raymond Woodward and Garland Hanscom and Don Hanscom and others sat around that table. And we laughed and we talked and we caught up and we talked about the legacy of Canadian leaders like John and Nyla Men, whose fingers have been on every church that existed in that province. And I was new to the role that I was filling, but over the years, these men became dear friends of mine. So we're sitting there in this Greek restaurant. It's pretty late. We're talking, we're laughing together. I look across the room and I saw James Blacksher. Brother Blacksher is a big, broad-shouldered man, superintendent of the Alaska Yukon District. He was and is a man of significance. At that time, I suppose he would have been in his early 70s. And Elder Blacksher, who had at that point been on the general board at least 20 years, he's sitting at a table with one young man in his early 20s. My initial response was to think, Brother Blacksher ought to be over here with us. He's got some things he could add to this conversation. The hoi polloi of the Canada Conference, the big wheels, we're over here. We're the group that are somebody. District Superintendent of the Alaska Yukon District, he ought to be over here with us. Who's that kid he's with? And I nudged the guy beside me, who is that? And they didn't know either. So I sat there, and I suppose God got to working on me, because in a bit it dawned on me that the most important conversation happening in that room was not a group of stuffed shirt preachers who had some measure of significance in a small slice of the North American population. Most important thing was that conversation between James Blacksher and a young man whose name I still don't know. I know some things about human nature. I'm relatively sure that that young man did not walk up to James Blacksher earlier that evening or earlier in the week and say, hey, Brother Blacksher, on such and such a night, I'd love to have a late night snack with you at the Greek place. No, it didn't happen that way. I can just almost guarantee. I've never asked Brother Blacksher. I'm not sure he'd even remember, but it doesn't happen that way. Instead, James Blacksher would have invited that young man to join him. He would have made the overture. He would have extended the invitation. It seldom happens that a person who is 2 or 3 decades younger than a sage asked to meet for coffee. But this interaction needs to happen. Listen, it needs to happen. So here's what I want you to do in coaching your sages. Challenge your sages to invite a young person who is not part of their extended family to join them for coffee, breakfast, or lunch. before your group of sages meet again. It may be that you need to provide the sages a few questions to help them kind of get the conversation moving and then to keep it flowing. Questions like, tell me about your career. Tell me about what you see yourself doing in the future. If they're younger, what's been your favorite subject in school? Why? Do you imagine ever using the things that you're learning in those classes in your career? How could that you enjoy ever be used for God? What book have you recently read? What hobby do you enjoy? If they're married and have children, ask about the kids and how they met their spouse and what the kids enjoy and what they enjoy, and ask them the question, if you could do anything for Jesus that you wanted, what would you do? Okay. The elder has to invite the younger. It may be that the first person he invites says, I just can't fit that into my schedule. There's another young man. There's another young woman. He invites another. It may be the first conversation does not go as well as it might. There's somebody else. And as the elder asks questions that indicate an interest in where these people are at in life, it's only a matter of moments before the young begin to ask the old similar questions. We're not going to get this done. What I'm talking about, what we're describing, we're not going to get this done from a platform at a general conference. It's not going to happen camp meeting. It's going to happen in these small groups, one-on-one connections, where that your sages who have experience in life, you're the person who's going to have to drive that. You're going to have to make it happen. I look forward to hearing your testimony about how it unfolded.